Hello, composers. What
Hello,
are we
everyone.
What are we talking about today?
Hi.
Master, I believe we are talking about a forgotten piece by me. Unfortunately, this is the second time I have to talk about my music.
The seventh time?
Yeah, I think
Second
it's the
time.
second time. Yeah,
Yeah. Louis that we connected with last week, we talked about percussion. So this is a percussion piece by Chun Ting.
it's an old piece.
And you kind of forget about it often, but it somehow ends up in your portfolio, or either you send it out, or what happens with it?
I mean, whenever I see whatever call for scores, if if the organizers look for a percussion piece, then I will think that perhaps I could send a piece from the early years in Buffalo, which is the piece discussed today. Yeah,
So what is the year of this piece? Is it like 2009 or 10 or something like that?
I believe so. I myself, even if I am the composer, I always forgot the exact year of the piece. I only remember that I had a draft, I had sketches from the year I was still in New England Conservatory, and then I kind of resurrected it because the Torsion quartet came to UB, came to
Uh-huh.
Buffalo. Then uh, David Felder asked me to write a percussion piece. Then I told him that I had a percussion duo which was pretty bad, but I could use it again. So that's the reason why I had such a piece. And actually during that period, I was very interested in traditional Chinese medicine, and occasionally I went to stores to get some herbs um, to make some soup. So at that time, I was very interested in traditional Chinese belief in the creation of the earth, something like that. So I look into the five elements, and then I imagine how the cold metal condenses the hot stream, something like that.
What would be
Uh,
the five elements? It's like earth, fire, wind, uh,
uh,
earth, and spirit.
I don't remember. You better check the Wikipedia.
Okay.
Uh, if say it in Chinese, I can say real quick like 金木水火土, but I guess there must be something more. I mean, there must be some translations that are more official than mine. So maybe you can look it up on Wikipedia. But it doesn't truly matter because when I composed the piece was only loosely based on those ideas. I just freely came up with whatever sound in my head. So the piece was pretty disorganized, and at first it contained three movements. And then when David saw the piece, he told me that perhaps you could have added two more contrasting movements. Therefore, I added the second and fourth movements to the piece. So now in total, there are five movements.
And have you planned on revising it now that it gets played, or since the last time it got played?
I think it was played again like 2 years ago, I guess. 2 years ago in Hong Kong. I think somehow the performers did the best revision because they they didn't play the whole thing. And this is the first time I didn't really complain about not being performed in its entirety. I think actually it works much better in the sense that it's because it was not complete. I believe they played three movements, and because it is an forgotten piece, I don't really remember which movements were omitted. So totally fits the title.
Probably we can
Yeah.
figure those out. Uh,
Yeah. So I'm really interested, like in the term forgotten piece. Um, what do you think makes it forgotten, or what doesn't? What about it doesn't represent
I
your music now?
I think when I was working on this piece, I basically tried to explore various colors from the percussion, and and I didn't study enough percussion pieces either. So maybe I was brave, more courageous compared to nowadays, and I wrote so much more notes in a rather shorter period of time. I think maybe that's good because it's really me in the piece. But but over so many years, my artistic direction has changed quite a bit. Then the piece, in my mind, in my opinion, becomes less and less representative to my own styles. So most of the
Mm-hmm.
time, when people ask me to present or if I attend anything that requires me to present pieces, usually I don't remember this piece. Or those for most of the times, a very sad fate of new music composer is a piece is usually performed once, and this piece got several performances. Somehow, this piece was successful in this regard, but this is not a piece that I truly remember most of the time. If you suddenly play it and if you make mistakes, I probably won't notice either because I don't really remember. I'm not a genius that remember everything in my own music. I won't try to claim that I know everything in my work. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
So
Do you
actually,
think this?
yeah.
Do you think the piece, like it? You said it doesn't. It's different than what you would write today. But do you think it represents the person you were a decade and a half ago?
I do think so. Yeah, I was more impulsive. I my temper was terrible. I I
That's
seldom
we all.
I seldom cursed, but I did have a really bad temper. I after losing a game in a chess tournament and then I kicked the trash bin, something like that. I my temper was terrible,
you
and
took it personal.
uh,
Yeah, I can't recall you ever getting mad at
No,
any of the. Yeah,
neither do I.
you always.
my temper was terrible. My temper nowadays is a little bit better, especially after having a son. I learned to be a little bit more patient. After being yelled all day, you will be more patient. I believe, but back then I was more impulsive, and it was also the same in another piece called as Snow. In that piece, I had a rather like a very loud, um, very uncalled for climax in like a two third of the piece, and I was very youthful, and I think in different spaces, it's it's pretty youthful too. I mean, actually, I think both pieces are somehow forgotten, at least forgotten in my head. I don't really think about them. I don't
But
really
I
present
remember
them.
that at least I remember you presenting as no several times
Yeah, I do
in
too.
school and to me personally and referring to that piece. But I really haven't heard this piece before you mentioned it like last week or so. So I would say that as no is kind of like okay, it might be a younger you, but you kind of remember it. You kind of forget about this piece.
I
Like
I
never
Yeah.
mention this.
I think
So, and,
I sorry.
no, you go on yours.
I think for both pieces, I could confidently say that I don't remember any notes.
Okay.
Again, it's the same thing. If you play it in front of me, and then if you make a bunch of mistakes, unless they are truly terrible, otherwise I won't recognize. I don't remember them.
Mhm.
But as no was sent out a little bit more frequently because the instrumentation was pretty common. But a lot of time I don't want to send it out because it's a very um the 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 material was very pitch based, very different from the materials that I prefer nowadays. Um, but for a percussion piece, somehow, although I forgot it in various level, but I sent that out a little bit more to whenever I see call for score because writing for percussion is somehow made me, even if my old me was less noise based, I could still use the piece because I think, oh, at least it is in a percussion piece, you can't rely on pitches too much. So some to a certain extent, in different spaces, was used in a lot of call for score. Yeah, but when I need to present ideas, maybe I talk about as low a little bit more, perhaps. Yeah.
So what was the process of writing the piece like? Because like both me and Juan talked about writing percussion pieces for Crunchfire, which was um, some master students that were at University of Buffalo that lived there that were friends of ours that
And we
we could
went
work
back
with.
and forth.
Yeah, we could work with regularly. But this piece you wrote for a visiting ensemble, which comes and visits. So what was that like, especially with percussion?
I try to imagine the setup myself. I try to imagine the setup. For example, I would imagine in front of the marimba there was a set of wood blocks. For example, I would try to imagine the setup because we all know percussion instruments require a lot of like physicality to perform it. You need to, the performers are usually very athletic. And in other words, actually, I at least I thought I had to figure out how the performers move, how the left and right hand coordinates, how they move their beaters, move everything from left to right because of the change of instruments. I would think about the dynamic of the instruments because some instruments at least seem to me that they were capable of like a bigger dynamic contrast and also I had a hard time about the pedal of the vibraphone.
Mm-hmm.
I I think at that time I was not too sure how it works compared to the piano. I myself play the piano, but I have never experienced how to pedal on the vibraphone. I had a lot of questions about those instruments. I I believe when I worked on it in UB, I was like the second or third year at school in the program. I I think I believe before that I wrote a piece that had percussion too, and that was not too successful. And so for this in different spaces, I try to go through the books such as like orchestration or whatever writing for percussion a little bit more.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, but I think if I look back, I commit a big mistake that I didn't really work it out with another percussionist.
Mm-hmm.
I think I could have like worked with a percussionist to
Okay.
get a little bit more idea. Most of the time, I imagine the sound in my head. For example, how the rattan contact with the tam tam, and I could imagine that on the surface of tam tam was not totally even, and then when the rattan lightly rub on the tam, there would be some kind of sound. I imagine these kind of
Yeah.
the things.
You did you actually try out any of these sounds, like either yourself or with another musician? Like I know, we there was a strong percussion studio there of students and
Yep,
Yeah,
yep, yep.
Tom
I tried
Cruella,
that.
the professor.
I
I
tried.
Um,
although I didn't work out with the percussionist like very intensively, I did at the end. As I believe that was like the Shelly or like
oh yeah, Shelley Purdy. Yeah,
or a
she was
guy or a guy called Angel, because
okay. I didn't know him.
somehow I met a percussionist who took my music theory for law major.
Okay.
Yeah, I got to know him, so I maybe it's easy to talk with guys too. So I talk with him, and then yeah, and then try things out. But to be honest, because a different in different spaces was a forgotten piece. I didn't remember whether I work with Angel in this piece. Perhaps, but anyway, in my lifetime, I did work with Angel. I have to clarify that. But anyway, in different spaces, I mean, for this piece, I think I did work with percussionists at the very end of the piece, and yeah, that's the
Did you
way.
have you ever tried like interacting with any of these instruments yourself? Because I know like the way you describe like the piano, that you have a very like special and like intimate relationship with the piano that kind of informs your writing for the piano. Have you ever, I mean, tried writing for like having that kind of interaction with other instruments like percussion instruments, especially um, because percussion instruments I think are easy to interact with.
I try to I try a lot about imagining myself as a horrible percussionist. So I try to play the same thing with like the four fingers, two fingers for each hand. Like try to like tap
Mm-hmm.
something, imagining that I'm actually performing it. Yeah, that's how I work on
Mm-hmm.
pieces most of the time, and sometimes I when I w- sometimes when I am in a big hurry, when I have to write so many notes, I but I don't have time, and I don't really have any chance to work with performers. I
Mm-hmm.
would imagine myself being one of them,
Hmm.
because I'm not a very athletic person. So especially for percussion, so I feel like if I can manage to hit that, perhaps the percussionist can make it. So
Hmm.
so that's how I comfort myself when I worked on
It's
this
very
piece.
interesting because, like, I know for me, like, I have, like, I have a room full of all sorts of little instruments that I've collected over the years, and I write outside the instruments, but like, if like the only well, the only like bowed string instrument I have is like a violin, but if I were to write a piece for cello, I would try to like at least hold the violin like a cello and kind of try to feel those movements as part of my composition process or and experiment with all the instruments and I kind of feel like you'd be a person that would do that, but I don't know if you do that.
I think the piece actually laid a very good foundation for me. At least after that, I understood the importance to work with the instrumentalist. I understood it
Yeah.
by learning a lesson. I I understood the size of the instruments matter because you don't get the same tam from one venue to the other, from one percussion ensemble to another.
Nope.
You will need to truly work with them. At least you need to get some approximate idea of that. I learned a lot from that, and after the piece, after the workshop with Tolishan, after working the piece at ICM, I began to admire percussionists more and more because I found that they are so creative about how to work with their
Mm-hmm.
instruments. I in a much more recent piece, I have a quite a difficult passage for Tam Tam asking for various beating positions, and I I asked for that because I watched videos in that the percussionist played a huge tam tams that enable a lot of nuances in of sound. But in my project, when I asked for the percussionist, she couldn't do that because of the the instrument is not the same tam tam, not the same size, not the same
Mm-hmm.
materials, but she was able to come up with solution. He puts a cloth on the tam tam to dampen part of the instrument, so as to allow the nuances that I asked for to come out in the performance. So it is just an example that I find that percussionists are usually very open-minded and very creative and athletic about performing our
Mm-hmm.
music. Yeah, they are just our best friend, to be honest.
Yeah. Yeah, it's interesting. I mean, and you have that experience that you have percussion pieces with multiple performers. I have quite a bit for percussion, but none of my percussion pieces have multiple performers. I have a bunch for one percussionist who really favored timpani, so I have a lot of timpani writing. And then I have some for crossfires duos. I would say my crossfires duos, though, like they kind of leave the open-endedness of like different percussion instruments sounding different is kind of like in the piece. But yeah, I can't even imagine like I'm like thinking back to like some of my timpani pieces, like because I can't imagine it. I would love another player to take it on, but I can't imagine another player taking it on because like I wrote it for one particular player and like their particular set of timpani. Um, it's so hard when you have all those like variables. Like an instrument like tam tam can be extremely different. Um, do you have any way that like because I remember when we were in grad school too that like I remember Matt Sargent, he had a piece that he adjusted the piece for the particular instruments, the unpitched instruments, where he had a computer program set up that he would play the instruments in and it would kind of adjust the piece to accommodate those instruments, which I thought was a really clever idea. Do you have any way of like of dealing with that since you've had like multiple performers like that some of these unpitched instruments can sound so different from performer to performer, almost like a completely new instrument.
even
Um,
even the pitch ones, like if you have
Yeah,
like
it's
a
true.
scale of tempo blocks, for example,
Yeah,
they
that's
could
true.
be totally different from any place, any setup to any other setup. Yeah, but yeah,
somehow somehow I adopt an approach to be more concerned about the overall gesture of the sonic events instead of the exact pictures, especially when I have to work with percussionists. Um, somehow, um, if I'm if I'm I mean, I don't want to stereotype, but percussionists seem to be very open to options, and
Hmm.
I myself, I want to be very open to options too. Yeah, I mean, for other instruments, maybe for example piano or for like a clarinet or oboe, sometimes you can be a little bit more specific in terms of like the pitches or the harmonies. But for percussion, just like what we have discussed, different materials, different hardness of the beaters, or for example, you can notate like hard beaters, but maybe that beater is slightly harder than the beater that you use when you try out the instruments. For example, I I open my eyes when somebody try to scratch the bass drum with a metallic brush, wire brush. But when I try when but before that when I try things out, I use a completely different wire brush. So so honestly, because I'm not competent to do any kind of changes by electronic means or by like recording techniques. So I am actually pretty open to various interpretations or also the choices of the instruments. Um, Somehow I think this is very good to be flexible too, because just imagine you need to write like let's say a multiphonics in your piece. You had a you had to write for the clarinet, and then you can include several multiphonics. You can check your manuals very carefully, but somehow the instrumentalist, the clarinetist, may not be able to perform that multiphonics simply
Mhm.
because of a different make of the clarinet, or maybe simply because of a different model, maybe simply because of the reed, or
Or they
perhaps
may suggest different fingering, for example, like
Mhm.
as
and
feedback.
and you know
Mhm.
what? One day I had a piece for like for oboe, electric guitar, and what the third instrument? I suddenly forgot. Anyway, another forgotten piece, and then for that project, I I purchased a book about oboe, about new techniques for oboe, including some like fingerings for multiphonics. And then I told the oboist that I found that fingering. Would you please try to play that, something like that? I asked her, and then she tried, but and then she asked me, "Where do you get the fingering? It didn't work." And then but somehow she tried and tried, and then she found another fingering to work it out. They actually I believe we are working on a genre that requires a lot of flexibility. Although our notation can be very accurate, can be very specific, but there are lots of risk factors. Yeah, when we write difficult music, maybe it is impossible, or maybe it is limited by many factors. So um, I think
Yeah.
I have been adopting an approach to be more concerned about the overall gesture, the contour, or general ideas of the colors for all of my sonic events. I understand somebody may criticize that I'm not like particular enough. I believe that is true, but flexibility can be a good asset too, in my opinion.
I mean, I think that I always think that you're always controlling music the same. It's just like a lot of times. I remember when I started letting up on my control of pitch. I felt like, oh, I can control the timbre and the technique much more when I'm a little bit looser with the sense of pitch. And it's I kind of feel like I've tried different things over the years, like, and I kind of feel like you can loosen up on one thing, but a lot of times when you loosen up on one thing, that gives you like more control of another. It just changing. I mean, I think traditionally, um, pitches and dynamics are the hierarchy of music, and oftentimes in contemporary music, not that those aren't important, many places that might be the most important, but there's a lot of other factors of like time and timbre, especially, that could be even more important. Um, so sometimes, yeah, so sometimes control is just completely
Yeah,
different.
is that you have to contextualize. Like pitch will be like the main thing, has been the main thing in Western music through, especially through functional harmony, through the
Mhm.
common practice period.
Well, and it's the
After
easiest to talk
that,
about. Like when I
yeah,
teach music theory, and I teach a very kind of a traditional music theory, and we spend not all the time, but the majority of our time talking about pitch. And people ask why. I'm like, well, really, because it's the most easiest to talk about, theoretically, and so it's gotten this hierarchy.
and that kind of takes me back that to an aspect that I wanted to point out earlier that Shanting spoke about, and that we have spoken about, like we spoke about it last stream with
Hmm.
Kyle, the lack of repertoire for percussion. And it's like, okay, there's a repertoire for percussion, but it's kind of dispersed. There's no real canon that you can refer to.
Hmm.
Um, Such as a piano canon or classical guitar canon or orchestral canon or stuff like that. And I think that now that you mention it, it has to do that it cannot. In what theory book do you see percussion pieces, for example, being studied?
Yeah, but it's also like, in theory, the history of percussion pieces is more contemporary than most theory books go as well.
Yeah,
Because I
because
would say
they focus on
the
pitch.
bulk majority of theory, yeah, and I would say the bulk majority of the pieces are actually Baroque and classical period. Maybe they might throw in like a occasional romantic, but that's, even though the romantic, I think, is maybe the most heavily reformed. I think the theory classes are heavily like Baroque, like Bacharels, and then like Mozart, and maybe a Haydn here and there. I don't know.
Yeah, but
That's what I
even
find.
in 20th century theory, what do you focus on? On pitch classes, on pitch set theory.
Nah,
Like
that's
there's
true.
no, you have one, like a book here, a lone book there about rhythm, possibly one theory of rhythm here and there that is not unified, that is by these crazy theorists, uh, a loner, an outsider, or something. um, you have the spectralists, for example, and electronic music composers talking about timbre on their own terms, but it's not like there's a canon, like a
Yeah,
unified view, like on set theory, for example.
yeah, that's true. I guess as like a horn like, so, I'm a horn player, and we have great parts in the orchestra, but our solo and chamber music is definitely lacking compared to other instruments, and I would say even including the percussion. Maybe we might have more, classical and romantic period pieces in that genre than percussion, but the contemporary music for percussion has really, I mean, there are some really great pieces.
Yes,
Um,
definitely.
yeah,
So
it's a great
we should
genre.
put it, quote, end quote, lack, my bad, lack of repertoire, because there's a lot of repertoire out there, but
Yeah,
there's not like a unified body that we can refer to, like we would as with orchestral pieces, for example. Like you want to learn orchestration, here's this bunch of pieces that you must study, for example, Debussy,
yeah.
Stravinsky, uh, Saint-Saëns,
I mean,
Tchaikovsky,
it
etc., etc.,
depends. Like,
Ravel,
I remember when I first got
Mahler.
linked up with this percussionist that specialized in timpani, and wanted me to write for timpani in a soloistic manner, I was immediately drawn to by like my teachers told me to go look at Elliot Carter's solo timpani works. Because he's one of the few people who wrote for solo timpani, and he wrote those pieces in a very collaborative manner. It actually at the center in Buffalo for I think it was for uh, Jan. Well,
No
yeah.
worries, no worries.
But who's still a character. I mean, he doesn't play percussion as much anymore, but he is at least I don't know if he's still, but he was a character in the new music scene, mostly as a journalist. Jan Williams, writing when we were in Buffalo. But anyways, yeah. So like there are I think there are some pieces for particular instruments in the percussion families like that. It's just that there are so many percussion instruments,
By
and they
the
all have, a different set of technique. I mean, I think timpani techniques are you can do similar things on any kind of drum, but they're not quite the same.
I think Huang made a good point when he talked about like the pitch. A lot of time when we try to organize materials in our work, one of the aspects is pitch organization, and then we may try to like have a motif defined by like rhythm and intervals. We may try to have some kind of pitch class like cell to organize all the pitches and harmonies, but somehow writing for percussion may lead to a problem to be solved, which is how do you organize all the unpitched, I mean indefinite pitched sound? Do do
Yeah, because
do.
they are
Do do
pitched.
do. So what is the pitch class of do
They
do
are
do?
pitched. We just don't know which pitch they're going to be. Yeah.
What if you just want to write some like some random noise? So how do we get a pitch class for that?
You
I
talked
Yeah.
about Shantin. You talked about gestures and overall uh, gestures or directions or stuff like that. And I would agree that that's a way to organize a piece, particularly a percussion piece. But when I have dealt with that, how I dealt with that is in terms of timbre. Like I think in terms of more similar timbres and less similar timbres, more contrasting timbres, and that's how I tend to organize a percussion piece. That's what I tend to gravitate towards. Because even if you
Mhm.
have the same pitches on, for example, a marimba and a vibraphone, they're gonna be so different
right.
and sound like so contrasting to each other that you are better off pairing a marimba with some tempo blocks, for example, even if there are
Yeah.
indeterminate pitches.
Or anything made out of wood. Yeah.
Yeah,
Yes.
I think.
Therefore, I believe, even if it was an forgotten piece, actually, it's taught me a lot of lessons. It's, I mean, before that, I was a very concerned about pitches and harmonies, and although I I also learned how to emphasize the direction and gestures, but I was very worried about whether this pitch or these harmonies. I would very concerned whether it sounds good when various like
Mhm.
pitch classes were brought together. But writing for percussion somehow made me not to worry about that only. I had to worry about the timbres of all these instruments, how I chose these instruments. Although I didn't make all the decisions carefully when I wrote in different spaces, but at least um, it's make me begin to think about that. I I remember I presented the piece in one of the master classes during June in Buffalo. I believe it was like um, Robert Phillips or the Hilda Paredes. I believe at least one of them or both of them asked me how I organized the instruments in terms of their timbres, and then I I I I was silenced because I couldn't think of anything. I didn't think much about that because back then I tried to develop from a composer who was only concerned about pitches. So so I would say the Forgotten Piece kind of began my journey to explore a little bit outside of my pitched world. So yeah,
Yeah,
so so somehow the forgotten piece was very useful in some sense.
yeah. So do we want to hear some of this piece because
Yeah.
we've been talking about it for a while, and Juan and
Yes.
I have heard it,
I,
but our
I
listeners
wanted to
might not have.
speak about the physical nature of a percussion piece, but I think that we should talk about it after we see and listen to it. So let
Mhm.
me just put it up. Uh, and here we go. Will that be wood? Hmm.
I'm not sure.
Pretty cool. I think, well, the first one was not very synchronized on purpose. That's what I could hear. And I could hear more wood sounds.
Mhm.
Like it would be like falling trees or falling branches. That's what I
Yeah.
will compare it to. The second one seemed
Is
hyper, on contrast, seemed hyper synchronized, like and flowing in a way.
mhm.
So I will say that that would be the water movement, probably. Who knows?
Is there any quotation? Um, because the first movement, it almost sounds like I don't. I don't know what it is, but it's not, it's like inspired by like things I hear like coming from a percussion practice room a lot.
I'm not too sure. I have to be very honest. I don't want to made up anything in front of any listeners or my
so
friends. Yeah.
so is this what we heard? Is this the first two movements of five, or
I
is
Three,
it
I
three
actually
movements.
actually I quickly checked
three?
uh
Yes, I mean,
the
yeah.
the past emails. Actually, they told me that they performed the first, second, and the fifth movements. So
Okay.
I believe what we have heard should be first, second, and fifth movements. If
And
they like
which
if they,
group is this?
remix.
Okay.
Yeah. If they lie to me, I won't be able to tell either. I didn't check the score. I should have. Sorry for the episode. I should have checked the score or something like that. But because
No, I mean, they
I
seem to have done a nice job. I mean, they had a convincing performance. I don't know if it's what you wanted or not, but
I believe they did a good job actually because I mean when they performed it's like 2 years ago or 3 years ago. I listened to their rehearsal. I didn't attend it physically, but they sent me the videos, and then I I mean nowadays when I try to recall my memory, I believe that at that time I found their performance captivating, very close to what I wrote. But nowadays but now I'm not reading the scores. So, but I believe I was correct anyway. Yeah,
yeah.
yeah. I'm an optimist. I have to say that. Yeah, and yeah,
So
I think I
this
enjoy
is
it.
your most recent piece for percussion, or just the one you chose?
Um, if percussion only, then this is my most recent piece. Yeah.
Is it the most recent because of just what opportunities you happen to get, or is it because that did this piece deter you from the genre or encourage you for the genre?
I think it's made me at least less scared, less afraid of percussion. I When I was still in Hong Kong, when I was studying at the Hong Kong Academy for Performing Arts, I was not very confident about uh, percussion instruments. I remember after my first orchestral piece in the academy, and um, the teachers asked me about why I wrote very little for the percussion instrument in the orchestral piece. I was not very confident about how to write for percussion. I think having a project to write for a percussion duo helped me a lot on this regard. Yeah.
Hmm.
Oh, by the
I mean,
way,
that might not be such a bad thing. I feel like because I feel like writing making the piece very percussion heavy is kind of a cop out in contemporary orchestration a
oh,
lot of times.
by the way, I just went through some old emails, and I found the program notes for the piece. I believe I rewrote it because I didn't have the original program notes, and the original one was longer. I believe because I I used to be very happy and enthusiastic about writing poem notes, but I gradually became less and less enthusiastic about that. So so in 2021, when I found out that the piece was accepted for a performance in Hong Kong, I wrote to Hong Kong Composer Guild because they asked me for a program note. So I wrote one. It reads sometimes elements interact to reinforce each other. Sometimes they suppress themselves. The processes are being modified in this collection of short pieces for percussion duets. That's it. Yeah, I could only think of these simple things for listeners. Very sorry.
Yeah, well,
Don't be
I
so
mean,
hard with us.
I think if you have a long program note, I think the assumption is most of the audience won't read it. So,
Uh,
um,
a few months ago, some friends sent me the booklet from a concert that features my piece in Hong Kong, also organized by Hong Kong Composer Guild. Um, like this time, they asked me for program notes, and I wrote like a few sentences, and then later on, when I received the booklet, I just realized that each page was dedicated to one single piece, and then my page was basically blank. I was very sorry.
So, do you know which movements? You said the first, the second,
And
and
fifth,
the fifth one. Do
yeah,
you know which
mhm.
one do they do does each represent or
oh,
no? No.
I don't
Okay,
remember, but I
that's fine.
believe each movement was about interaction of at least two elements.
Oh, I
So
see.
so those movements are not about individual elements in Chinese cosmology. Yeah.
Okay, okay. So, yeah, so it's earth, wood, metal, fire, and water. In difference, the difference with Western ones would be wood and metal mainly. You don't have air over there as an element, which I find kind
Mhm.
of interesting. The first one, it was kind of like metal and wood
Mhm.
in a way, you can say, but it was not that synchronized on purpose. It was like more like a back and forth. The second one, it seemed more like a hyper instrument, a super instrument where both were
Mhm.
playing the same instrument and were in coordination, at least to me, and also the flowing of things seemed pretty natural. It's kind of like it flowed in a way that was kind of like a moto perpetual. The third one um, kind of contrasted with the other ones because mainly because of the drums, that low sound, that profound sound. It kind of reminded me of the earth in a way, if we are gonna make
Mhm.
it programmatic. Like I was searching for that since you mentioned that they were based on that. But it's kind of like, I think that the performer shows this because of this contrast between synchronization especially and timbres
Mhm.
in a way too, um, because the first one is not that synchronized, you might say. They are like not, I don't want to say not playing the same music, but kind of like playing in an antiphonal type of way more than anything else. In the second one, they are like really on beat playing the same music. You can notice that they are following each other, like they are constructing the same line and they are interacting with each other very actively. And the third one is contrast with both in the sense that sometimes they are in sync, sometimes they are not in sync. It's more like a there's a complementarity there between both. It's kind of like they come together, they get further apart, and then they come together. Also, there's higher contrast in dynamics. It kind of goes from loud to soft, soft to loud, and back. So I found that kind of like they read the whole five movements, and I think that they chose this because of this reason. Also, I must point out that the marimba is a constant throughout all three movements. Was it that way in the original five movements? Was the marimba present in all of five?
I don't think so.
Oh,
And as I mentioned before, I think actually the group made a very wise choice to pick these three movements. I think the piece works this way better because it's more concise. Actually, I when I looked back, when I look into the old emails, actually I did ask them what they think about like performing the whole set, but actually they they decline, and I nowadays when I listen to the recording with a more like intelligent brain or a clearer brain. I don't know how to describe. Maybe I'm older and wiser. I believe so, and I like it this way. Actually, somehow if I have to send out the piece again, fortunately or unfortunately, I think I prefer to use this version. I I think somehow it's because it is concise, it is not too long, so it is also showing a very youthful and energetic side of the piece. I think I like this version much better than the original one. Yeah.
also to speak of the physicality and theatricality of percussion writing, because there's both. You, for a percussion piece, it is my belief that you must see them too, uh, more so than most other instruments, because it's so physical. It's so, they are so engaged with the instruments themselves that the sounds
Mhm.
and the timbres is like you are seeing them come to life. But not only that, you could also see how the uh, left performer, the woman performer, kind of moved. She changed the timbre. She was the change. If you consider them two characters in a play, she will be the dynamic character, whereas the other one will be a static character. He always stayed with the marimba. He always stayed with the same timbres, more or less, you might say. So there's this type of
Mhm.
interaction, conversation between performers, between timbres, between instruments, between uh, human beings themselves, you might say. So this is taking
Mhm.
it a bit over the edge, probably overthinking
Mhm.
it, but it makes you think when you see something that uh, you might not catch if you only hear it. And this might be something that is what I wanted, one of the aspects that I wanted to point out with the physical nature of a percussion piece. I think that a percussion piece is meant to be seen in so many ways. And Megan, your music is like that a lot.
Mhm.
So it's like
I
I
love
see,
percussion. Maybe that's why I really gravitate toward percussion. It's
yeah.
probably my favorite thing to write for.
And it's like when I think of the music I written for percussion, it doesn't work the same way when you only listen to it or when you read the score, only than when you see it live, because there's a movement involved and there's an interaction
Mhm.
between the performers that it's missed when you only hear listen to it. You have to see it too. And then we enter a space in music, we discussion in music that is not only about the music, about the pitches, about the timbres, but also about the action that is taking place on stage. So it
Mhm.
adds
I
another
do
total
think like
dimensionality to it.
a contemporary music concerts I go to, if there's like a percussion piece or a piece with percussion, oftentimes an intermission or after the concert, people are will go on stage because they're interested in the percussion setup.
Yeah,
You don't really see that for
yeah,
other,
definitely.
maybe electronics. That's about it.
I've seen that pretty commonly on percussion
Hmm.
recitals, definitely. people go on
Mhm.
stage and want to play them and want to see how they sound and how they got different sounds and stuff like that. I
And how
remember,
they're arranged and what was the sound and the speed. Like, there's a curiosity, I think, like, because, like, if we're listening to a string quartet, the string quartet can be inventive in sounds, but, the sounds are going to come from either a violin or a viola or a cello. Whereas sometimes you have no idea what the sound comes from because people can commonly build new percussion instruments all the time. It's like just part of the rhetoric.
yeah, definitely. Also, it kind of makes me think about what Tom Collor said to Jason and Bobby after they played my piece. Is like, you guys sounded like there were like 100 instruments on stage. So another aspect of percussion is that you can make them sound like really minimalistic, or you can make them sound like there's a huge array of sounds of timbres going on stage. Is they lend themselves to
Mm-hmm.
that. It's kind of part of the l- unwritten rules, unwritten,
Mm-hmm.
you may say now, tradition of percussion repertoire that it's kind of being built as we
Mm-hmm.
speak, and it's like it
And,
has not been codified, but we can begin to try and codify it in some ways. That's what we are doing right now,
yeah,
in some
I mean,
way.
I think that's part of the difficulty of the genre too. Is like, I teach a lot of young, like really young, beginning composers, and I would say all of them pretty much are very creative and inventive with new materials, and they have a lot of ideas, but they have a hard time then like sitting down and like developing those ideas. And when you have a percussion ensemble with endless instruments, theoretically, I mean, obviously, there's a lot of practical concerns to that. It's easy, especially for a young composer, to get carried away and just keep adding new sounds and new instruments without actually developing those into a piece.
Hmm. Yeah,
Um, yeah, I
trying to
think my
explore.
brain goes. I would have definitely done that at their age because they're like teenagers. I would have definitely done that at their age, and my approach now tends to be like the opposite extreme. Like the pieces I wrote for Bob, I wrote two pieces for Bobby and Jason. One is for a piece of cardboard for two players. They're both playing on the same piece of cardboard the whole time. The other is for two pieces of metal. They each have their own piece of metal, but they're playing. It's like it's very minimalistic. It's just like picks one thing and I explore it. Um, I don't know because that's been an easier way for me to explore percussion because for me, like it's very easy to be creative and develop a material when like the possibilities I make for myself are very small. It's very hard when it's anything. And like percussion can be anything. I mean, it can be really anything. Um, and it can be, yeah, it can be one of those things that can be really difficult
And I will say that
to
especially
focus.
anything in the avant-garde, in the U.S. avant-garde tradition, because of John
Mm-hmm.
Cage, that he had all of these percussion piece
Oh yeah,
ideas.
I mean,
After that,
I remember Jacob Gottlieb in his piece for Crossfire put all these cutting boards from his kitchen because he liked the sound of them, and it wasn't, it didn't strike me as, oh wow, that's a really unique idea or different. It just seemed, like it was part of percussion repertoire.
whereas in other parts of the world, they may seem wild or
Mm-hmm.
illogical. And I'm thinking about Europe and possibly Latin America. Like in the US, they really kind of have this tradition of expanding that sense of what a percussion piece can be. Uh,
I think in Europe too.
Europe too?
From
Okay.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know all parts of Europe, but like I guess I know Germany pretty much. Is the part of
You're
Europe I
right.
know the best.
The Germans.
I would say in Germany, yeah. but I could see, yeah, like if Italians and French would be quite as
We'll go
I guess
more,
progressive in that way.
yeah, we'll go more to pitch percussion or to orchestral
Hmm.
percussion. Like that would be my, at least that's my perception of it.
Yeah.
Uh, Shantin, you kind of like
Yes.
focus on the instruments here on each movement. Was that the idea? I'm guessing, right? When
I
do you remember?
I
You
remember
were-
that when I talk about like metal, I chose like tam tam and cymbal. I I remember that I picked membrane instruments when I try to write something about fire. Other than that, I don't remember much. Yeah,
Hmm.
I I remember
the
I
cymbal,
wanted to write about like
the cymbal was fired. So, sorry,
membrane instruments. The tom tom
Hmm.
the tam tam was fired.
was fire, and then the wood block and marimba should be representing the water, I believe. Yeah.
Okay.
I
Huh.
unfortunately I didn't write any diary. Yeah.
So, if if a percussion ensemble came to you with a like a commission to write a piece, would that be a project you'd be enthusiastic to accept? And like, what would you approach the percussion ensemble differently than you did back then?
I I think so. Yeah. I think I prefer to write a single movements of work that that focuses on one kind of sound or one kind of struggle between sounds instead of like trying to play with various kind of songs in one single piece. I think
Hmm.
the omission of like two movements from the original work could be good because the in this piece the marimba had a constant presence. Somehow this unifies the piece, make it
Hmm.
more closely knitted. But so when I if I have a chance to write for percussion ensembles, duets, or trio or quartets, I think I would try to look for something that can bring the whole piece together. And I would try to focus on or two kinds of percussion instruments. When I say kind, that means, for example, membrane instruments or like metallic instruments, pitch or unpitch. I would
Hmm.
think about that more carefully. I would try to organize that. I learned it from a hard way in this piece, and yeah,
Yeah,
and and it's time to
and be a
it's time to be better after like more than 1 decade. I believe I need to improve a little bit more than that. Yeah.
I mean, I don't dislike the piece. I enjoyed the piece, but I would be excited to hear a like a content
More
can
mature.
yeah,
Yeah,
more mature. I think that would be an exciting project to hear. I think it would yeah.
but I think what I was gonna say is that in the end you ended up collaborating with the performers, with the percussionists, even if it wasn't when writing the piece, it was after writing the piece because of what they did, because of the movements they chose to play. Uh, that usually happens when you are going back and forth with percussionist. Sometimes it's like you have a sound in mind, you have a mallet, a possible mallet in your head, and then they kind of like talk you into another mallet. For example, like that mallet might be too hard for this register, this, that mallet may be too soft, it may not sing well, etc., etc. But it also kind of like goes back to what we were talking with Kyle last episode how percussionists and composers, non-pitch focused composers and percussionists kind of like get along pretty well when doing collaborations and kind of learn from each other in many ways. Like here, you are saying that you learn how not to focus so much on pitch and how to focus more on the overall gesture, overall structure, overall movement, overall timbres use, as a way to organize the piece, but also like uh, how they shape the piece itself. Like the form changes, they change the form totally into something that was more concise, as you mentioned, something that was more straightforward. They probably made your piece stronger by the decisions they made.
Right.
Would you say that? Well, you said that,
I believe so. Yeah.
and
Actually,
that's one of the purest form of collaboration with performers. And think that I don't really think that we collaborate in to that degree with other type of, or as often and to that degree with other types of performers. I think that working with percussion and percussionist yields itself to a more collaborative project in the end. That's what I think, what I wanted to express.
I mean, but I also think that like I don't know about you, but like all of my favorite projects for pretty much actually my whole life as a composer have been the ones that I've written the most collaboratively. So I feel like that's a positive thing, and I have had a lot of, I've had several percussionists who I have worked out
But
really
how do
collaboratively
you
like that,
feel
but I've
about
had others.
the degree of collaboration? Is it the same with percussionists that it is with other type of other performers, other instrumentalists?
It can be, it
It can
can be,
be.
but I notice that there are more percussionists who are more enthusiastic about that and more excited about that. But yeah, I mean, I guess I had lot of my greatest collaborators were that were not percussionists, especially were people who ended up, kind of shortly after my collaboration, ended up having very big careers. But this was like I kind of caught them at the right time before they had all the skill set, but not really the fame yet, where they were kind of willing to put a lot of effort into different projects.
I think
Um,
that the more you
a
know
lot
the
of it's just being
instrument,
at the right time, right
uh-huh,
place. There's a lot to just being in the right time, right place, kind of.
right moment in your life, in your
Mm-hmm.
career, in your development as an artist, as a
Mm-hmm.
composer, as a performer, what are your
Like
priorities?
some of my collaborative pieces, and they that were successful because of the collaboration. Sometimes I look back and I'm like, wow, that was like a miracle that like all these people were in the same place at the same time, and we were all had a similar goal and a similar mindset that we were able to work together towards this goal. And yeah, it's amazing because like a lot of pieces I've written that way, there's no way the pieces would ever exist without those experiences. It's just fun working with percussionists because I think because they're so hungry for repertoire, um, they're just much more eager for those experiences. And they tend to be easier to work with in general.
Yeah,
Um,
but I also
yeah.
think that another part comes from us composers. Like when we are more familiar with the instruments, when it's an instrument we play, or that we at least know pretty well, like the piano, for me the guitar. You don't get this type of collaboration. You kind of have in your head what you want, and you know that it can be done, and it's like, okay, like, okay, you may give some space, you may yield some of your composition to the suggestions of of a particular performer, but in the end, you know what are the parameters, what are the limits of that instrument. uh, with percussion, it seems like a virtually endless world of possibilities in the end, and possibly that makes it more malleable, more mutable. Also, that's one aspect. uh, we're talking in a chamber music setting. If we were talking about a big ensemble, if we were talking about a big orchestra setting, then the space for collaboration will be minimal, if anything at all, really. Like,
Mm-hmm.
what can you collaborate, like, possibly with a conductor, uh, and it's just like
Mm-hmm. I
taking
mean, I
someone's
guess yeah,
life.
it's true. Like a lot of these percussion ensembles tend to be self-run, and they're not so administrative heavy, which is interesting. Yeah, it's interesting because a lot of. I mean, I guess my point is I don't think there's anything. If we take away the historical aspect, there's nothing about the percussion instruments that necessarily makes them more conducive to these collaborative experiences and being more inventive. It's just that because of their history, the percussionists tend to be more open to that type of experience. But I wonder too, is because that percussion groups tend to be less formally organized, that they don't have big big boards or directors or administration or can even conductors most of the time to
There's no
uh
middleman,
yeah,
possibly.
it's just simpler.
Huh. Yeah, that's something to think about, definitely. All the bureaucracy involved in when you have bigger and bigger ensembles. Like, there's a
Yeah.
bureaucracy over there, for sure. And you have to adapt to that bureaucracy, and or either don't collaborate with that institution at
Yeah.
all. Like, there's a decision for the composer over there. Lots of stuff to think about, definitely. But
Mm-hmm.
I think that that's all I got. Chunting, Megan, do you want to add anything else to the
No,
conversation?
I mean, I enjoy. I mean, I think it brought up a lot of topics and a lot of things to think about. Yeah.
The last thing I would like to say is, although it is kind of a forgotten piece, but recording this episode brings me back a lot of memories. Um, the first performance brought me to Australia, and it was my first time and the only time that I traveled to the South Hemisphere. And I like the place. I went to Sydney Conservatorium, and the percussion is actually new. David Felder. I believe he moved to Australia after studying at UC San Diego. I
Okay.
yeah, and that was my first time having a piece selected by Hong Kong Composers Guild for any foreign conferences. So somehow, somehow maybe that's the reason why the piece still staying in my catalog because of some of the memories that I remember better, even
Mhm.
if the music itself is kind of forgotten, you know.
But also, I think we are speaking from composer's point of view, specialist point of view, whereas possibly performers enjoy this piece more than we do or than you do, particularly, or think of it like more fun to play than other more complex pieces of yours, for example, or more advanced, more mature, whatever you want to call them. I think that we must get out of our heads as hyper specialized, hyper trained composers in the music of the avant-garde of 20th century, 21st century, and try to get in the shoes of performers and try to get in the shoes of the audience. And you have the ability to do that because you don't remember it that well. uh, yeah,
The
no,
shortcoming become an advantage.
yeah, I
Mhm.
think it does in some ways because you are not as close to it as an artist, as a creator, as a composer. You are able to see it more objectively from afar. um, and that's not the case with all of our pieces or with most of our pieces, I will say. So in this specific case, I think that you can like you made so a judgment on the form because of the decisions the percussionist made of what to include and what to omit. So I think that you are seeing it more objectively as if than if you were more attached to it, or that it, or if you had written it more recently, or if you remember more of the whole process, and were more attached to the form as a whole. I think that that yielding that you make, that concession of the form to be in the hands of the performers and to change it, to basically they change your piece, uh, for all intent and purposes. And that acceptance of them changing it, I think that is a result of you not being so close to it. So yeah, I think that in this particular case is an advantage because you are able to see it more objectively. And we as composers tend to kind of attach ourselves a lot to our pieces, to our forms, kind of like not let go of some materials when we have to, etc., etc., even if it's not good for the piece. So I think that with this piece, it kind of like it you can see it from the third person perspective, let's say, as an spectator, not as creator. So that's good, I will say.
Thanks for your kind word.
Mhm.
Yeah.
I guess they are kind. Well,
Yeah.
they can be. They could be. Yeah. Huh.
Yeah. Yeah. Well,
You guys wanna
thanks
add
for.
anything else?
No, I mean, thanks for sharing the forgotten piece. I think it's it takes some like courage to share a piece that is older and not maybe what you consider your best work. We always kind of want to share like our what we consider our best work, but I think we can learn so much from some of these like older pieces, these forgotten pieces.
Yeah. Thanks for making yourself vulnerable, or
Yeah.
is
My
that
pleasure. If I can contribute to the podcast a little bit.
yeah, that's
Hmm.
cool. Well, it seems that this is it for our heroes, the forgotten composers. We'll see you guys later. Be safe. Bye.
Take care. Bye.
Bye.